She convinced me an open marriage was about trust. I played along for 4 months. Then I picked up her phone and found out the whole thing was his idea. That's when I stopped playing and started building a case she never saw coming. My name is Liam Baxter. I'm 42 years old. I supervise a county road crew out of Clarksburg, West Virginia. 12 guys, heavy equipment, early mornings, and honest work. I've been doing it for 14 years. I'm not a complicated man. I wake up before the sun, I do my job, I come home. Amber and I built something together over 9 years. A house on Ridgeline Drive. A 4-year-old son, named Mason, who thinks dump trucks are the greatest invention in human history, and what I believed was a solid marriage. Amber is 37. She manages the billing department at a mid-sized medical supply company downtown. Smart, organized, driven, all the things I admired about her when we met. But somewhere between Mason's second birthday and last spring, something shifted in her. She started talking about personal growth, then about feeling confined. Then one Saturday morning in April, over coffee at our own kitchen table, she suggested an open marriage. I didn't say yes immediately. I want to make that clear. We talked about it for 3 weeks. She made it sound reasonable, almost clinical. We love each other. This doesn't change that. We just need rules. And the rules, she said, were everything. Total honesty, no secrets, no emotional attachments. She looked me dead in the eye and swore she hadn't done anything yet, that this was just about what she needed going forward. I should have walked out the door right then. Instead, I agreed. I told myself I was being mature, open-minded, the kind of man who didn't let insecurity drive decisions. The truth was simpler and uglier than that. I was terrified of losing her. So I played along. I kept playing along for 4 months while something rotted underneath us, and I told myself every day that I was handling it fine. I wasn't. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in August. Mason had worn himself out at the splash pad that afternoon and gone down early. Amber said she was heading to bed too, said she was tired, said she had an early call. I stayed up watching a game. Around 11, I went to lock the front door and noticed her phone on the kitchen counter, screen lit up with a notification. I don't make a habit of reading my wife's messages. I never had before. But the preview was right there, and the name at the top stopped me cold. Rick. I picked up the phone. I'm not ashamed of it. What I found wasn't just a flirty exchange. It was a thread going back 11 months, 4 months before she ever brought up the open marriage idea. There were plans made and kept. There were inside jokes about places she'd told me she'd been alone. And then there was a message from Rick dated 3 weeks before our open marriage conversation, and it read, "Just tell him you want an open arrangement. That way you're covered and nothing has to change between us." My vision went sharp and narrow the way it does before something bad happens on a job site. She hadn't come to me with a need. She hadn't had some awakening about personal growth. Rick Slade had handed her a script, and she had delivered it to me at our kitchen table with a straight face and a steady voice while our son slept down the hall. I kept scrolling. What I found next made it worse. In the same thread, over several weeks, Amber had shared details about her finances. Account balances. What I earned. How much we had in savings. She had typed out casually, like reading off a grocery list. Liam has about $42,000 in his personal account. The joint has around 18. He doesn't check it often. She had been feeding our life to him piece by piece. I set the phone down on the counter, exactly where I'd found it, screen down. I stood in my own kitchen in the dark and breathed slowly until the noise in my head quieted enough to think. Mason was asleep down the hall. That was the only reason I didn't wake her up right then. Instead, I went to the living room, sat down in the chair by the window, and started making a list. Not of grievances. I'm not that kind of man. A list of every step I needed to take, and in what order, and how fast. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan, and I wasn't going to waste a single day of it. I didn't sleep, not a single hour. I sat in that living room chair until the sky outside the window went from black to gray to pale orange, and I just thought, methodically. The way I think through a job site problem when something's gone wrong and I need to figure out the safest way to fix it without making it worse. By 6 in the morning, I had 3 things decided. I was not going to blow up in front of Mason. I was not going to tip my hand to Amber before I had all the pieces in place. And I was going to call Joel Carpenter the moment I could get outside alone. Joel has been my closest friend since we were 19 years old. We grew up 3 streets apart, played ball together in high school, went our separate ways for a few years, and somehow ended up living in the same county again. He's a straight shooter. The kind of guy who'll tell you when you're wrong and mean it because he respects you, not because he wants to be right. When I married Amber, Joel was my best man. He stood up there with me and shook my hand and smiled. But I remembered something else, too. 2 weeks before the wedding, he had pulled me aside and said, quietly, that he'd heard something about Amber and a guy she used to see. He wasn't sure what it meant. I told him to let it go. I told him I trusted her. I thought about that at 5:45 in the morning, sitting in the dark. At 7, Amber came downstairs in her work clothes, moving through the kitchen like it was any other Tuesday. She poured herself coffee, kissed the top of my head on her way past, and asked if I'd slept okay. I told her I'd stayed up too late watching the game. She nodded and went to get Mason up. I watched her go and felt something cold settle in my chest. That was the woman who had handed Rick Slade our account balances. That was the woman who had let him script her pitch to me. And she kissed the top of my head like it was any Tuesday. I got Mason fed and into his shoes. When Amber backed out of the driveway to take him to daycare, I was already on the phone. Joel picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The phone, the messages, the dates, Rick's instruction to her, the financial information she'd passed along. I talked for almost 20 minutes straight, leaning against my truck in the driveway. Joel didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause. I should have pushed harder before the wedding, he said finally, his voice tight. You couldn't have known it'd go this far, I replied. What are you going to do? I'm going to be smart about it, I told him. But I need to ask you something first, and I need you to be straight with me. I paused. You and Amber. Before I met her. Was there something there? Another pause. Longer this time. It was 3 weeks, Joel admitted. Nothing serious. We went on a few dates. It didn't go anywhere. She moved on. I should have told you back then. I didn't because it was nothing, and I didn't want to make it weird. Then when I heard that rumor before the wedding, I didn't know how to bring up both things at once without sounding like I had an angle. He exhaled. I'm sorry, Liam. I genuinely am. I turned that over in my mind. 9 years I'd known this man as my best friend. He kept something small and let it sit. I didn't like it, but I understood it, and I believed him. We're square, I said. But I need you now. Tell me what you need. Joel replied without hesitation. I needed a place to land if I had to move fast, and I needed someone who could help me think clearly when my own head got too loud. Joel offered both before I even finished asking. That afternoon, while my crew was finishing a resurfacing stretch on County Road 9, I made 2 more calls. The first was to a family law attorney named Douglas Hale. I got his name from a guy on my crew whose brother had used him in a custody dispute. Hale's assistant fit me in for a Thursday morning consult. The second call was to my bank. I didn't move any money yet. Hale had told the assistant to tell me not to touch anything before we talked, but I asked specifically about separating access to the joint account and what that process looked like. By the time I pulled into my driveway that evening, Amber was inside making dinner. Mason was running trucks across the kitchen floor, and nothing looked any different from the outside. But I was different. The man who'd sat across from her in April and agreed to her open marriage because he was scared, that man was gone. What was left was someone who'd spent a full night with the truth and come out the other side clear-eyed and cold. She set a plate in front of me and asked about my day. I told her it was fine. I watched her smile and turned back to the stove. She had no idea the ground had already shifted beneath her feet. Thursday morning, I sat across from Douglas Hale in a small office on the second floor of a building on Pike Street. He was mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of measured calm that told me he'd heard every variety of bad news a marriage could produce. I laid out everything. The messages, the timeline, Rick's coaching, the financial data Amber had passed along. I talked for almost 30 minutes straight. Hale made notes and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. The financial disclosure to a third party is significant, he said. Depending on what she shared and how it was used, that could factor into asset division. I want you to screenshot and preserve every message you saw before she gets any indication you've been in that phone. I told him I'd already done it the morning after. Sent copies to a private email account Amber didn't know existed. Hale nodded like that was exactly the right answer. He walked me through the custody picture clearly and without softening anything. West Virginia courts start from a presumption of shared parenting. But he said if Amber moved to restrict my time with Mason before we filed, I needed to respond in writing every single time. Document every denied visit. Log every date and hour. He also told me to open a new individual checking account that same day and route my next paycheck into it. Not to hide assets, but to establish separation before she had the chance to drain what we'd built together. I did both before noon. The new account took 11 minutes at the branch on Jefferson Avenue. I sat in the parking lot afterward and felt the first solid thing I'd felt in days. A foundation under my feet again, even if it was just a bank account. That evening Joel came over. Amber was at a work dinner, or said she was, and Mason was down for the night. Joel sat at my kitchen table with a beer he barely touched, and I walked him through where things stood legally. He listened carefully, but about halfway through, he set the bottle down and looked at me straight. "I've been sitting on something since we talked the other day," he said, "and I'm not going to sit on it anymore." I waited. When Amber and I stopped seeing each other back before you met her, it wasn't mutual. I ended it. She didn't take it the way I expected. She went quiet, not dramatic, but I could tell something was off. He paused, turning the bottle slowly in his hands. "Then about 3 years into your marriage, she called me. Out of nowhere, late on a weeknight. Said she missed talking to me, that she felt like she couldn't be herself anymore. I shut it down immediately, didn't leave any room for it. And I never told you because I didn't want to blow up your marriage over what felt like one strange phone call." He met my eyes. "I'm telling you now, because you deserve to know the full picture, not just the parts that are easy for me to admit." I sat with that for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. 3 years into our marriage. Mason hadn't even been born yet. She had circled back to Joel when something in our life felt insufficient to her. Not with Rick Slade, not with some stranger, but with the one man she knew I trusted most in the world. That told me something about how she operated. It wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. "I appreciate you telling me," I said finally. "I mean that." Joel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 3 days. "She wasn't right for you, Liam. I think somewhere I knew that even at the wedding, and I didn't say it loud enough, and I'm sorry for that too." I shook my head. "You couldn't have known it'd land here." "Maybe not, but I should have been straighter with you a long time ago." We didn't talk much after that. We sat in the quiet of the kitchen, 2 men in their 40s on the other side of something that couldn't be undone, and I felt something clarify inside me the way a road levels out after a long, rough stretch. Not anger, not grief, just a cold, clean certainty about what came next. Before Joel left, he gripped my shoulder at the door. "You need a place for you and Mason. Any night, any reason, my door is open. You know that." I didn't know that, and knowing it made the next steps feel less like falling and more like walking forward on solid ground. It was Hale's paralegal who first flagged it, a woman named Carol Pitts who handled financial discovery for the firm and had the sharp, unsentimental focus of someone who had spent years following paper trails through other people's worst decisions. I had handed over 3 months of bank statements at Hale's request, and Carol called me on a Wednesday afternoon with a question that straightened my spine before she finished the sentence. "Mr. Baxter, are you aware of savings account at Tri-County Federal Credit Union in Mason's name?" I was not. She explained it patiently. The account had been opened 14 months ago, the same month Rick and Amber's messages began. Deposits had been coming in at regular intervals, ranging from $300 to $500 at a time. The balance currently sitting in the account was just over $7,000. The account was listed as a custodial savings account in Mason's name, but Amber was the sole authorized manager. My 4-year-old son's name, on a secret account, funded with money quietly pulled from the life we were supposedly building together. I drove to Hale's office that same afternoon. He was already on it. He told me that intentional pre-divorce asset concealment, particularly using a child's name as cover, was exactly the kind of thing that influenced judges during asset division proceedings. It suggested deliberate preparation, a plan made long before any conversation about separation. He was going to subpoena the full account history and present it as part of the financial picture. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store and bought Mason a box of the animal crackers he'd been asking about all week. Standing in the cereal aisle, holding that yellow box, I felt something move through my chest that wasn't anger and wasn't grief. It was closer to grief's quieter cousin, the kind that doesn't make noise, just settles in and stays. That evening Amber mentioned she had plans Friday evening. A work event, she said, already looking at her phone while she stirred her coffee. I nodded and told her that was fine, that I'd take Mason over to Joel's place. She smiled and said great, and then she moved on asking whether we needed more laundry detergent. I watched her move through the rest of the evening, loading the dishwasher, folding a basket of clothes, reading Mason his bedtime story in that warm, patient voice she used with him. She was good at the normal things. She always had been. It was the underneath parts where she had been quietly coming apart for over a year. Friday morning, while Amber was in the shower, I spent 3 minutes in the kitchen going through her work bag. Day planner, 2 pens, a folded receipt. I photographed the receipt without touching it beyond the corner. It was from a restaurant called Harlan's Grill, across town, dinner for 2, dated 6 days earlier on a night she told me she had a team meeting that ran late. I put the receipt back exactly as I'd found it and went to make Mason's breakfast. By the time I sat down across from my son with his bowl of cereal and his animal crackers and his absolute certainty that the world was a good and manageable place, I had one clear thought running underneath everything else. Every piece I gathered was another piece she had handed me herself. She had built this case with her own choices, day by day, and she hadn't even noticed she was doing it. I was just the one keeping records. Jill Wolfe reached out on a Thursday evening, 10 days after I'd found Amber's messages. I didn't know her well. She and Amber had worked together 2 years back and stayed friendly after Jill moved to a different company. We'd shared maybe a dozen conversations at cookouts and birthday parties over the years. She texted me directly, which surprised me. "Liam, I heard through the grapevine that things aren't good between you and Amber. I don't want to overstep, but I think you should hear some things from me before you hear them from someone else. Can we talk?" I called her back within the hour. Jill was careful at first, choosing her words the way someone does when they're about to say something they've rehearsed, but are still nervous about. She told me she'd known for a while that Amber was seeing someone. She hadn't known his name at first, just that there was a man Amber talked about with a particular kind of energy, the kind that's hard to disguise when you're genuinely excited about someone. She said she told herself it wasn't her business. That couple sometimes had arrangements. That maybe I already knew. But then about 2 months ago, Jill said, her voice tightening slightly, "Amber said something to me that I haven't been able to shake." She said she'd been thinking about what her life would look like if she simplified things. Her word, simplified. A pause. She said Mason was young enough that transitions are easier at this age. She was talking about leaving you, Liam. She was already planning it. She just hadn't decided on the timing yet. I sat with that. Mason was young enough that transitions are easier. My son, 4 years old, reduced to a logistical consideration in his mother's exit timeline. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked, not accusing, genuinely wanting to understand. Jill was quiet for a moment. Then she said, simply, "Because she's not the person I thought she was. And you're a good father. Mason deserves to have you fighting for him at full strength, and you can't do that if you don't know what you're dealing with." I thanked her, and we talked for another 20 minutes. She confirmed Rick Slade's last name, confirmed he worked at the same company as Amber, and told me she'd seen them together twice at a bar on Clement Street on nights Amber had told her she was out with her sister. Jill didn't know about the financial information Amber had passed to Rick. When I told her, the silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. "She gave him your account balances?" Jill said finally. "In detail," I replied. "Over several weeks." Another silence. Then, "I'm sorry, Liam. I'm genuinely sorry I didn't say something sooner." After I hung up, I sat on Joel's back porch. I'd been staying with him for 5 days by then, and looked out the yard in the dark. Jill had given me something valuable. A witness outside the immediate circle, someone with no personal stake in the outcome, who could corroborate the timeline. I forwarded her contact information to Douglas Hale the next morning with a summary of what she told me. What I didn't let myself dwell on was the other thing underneath Jill's call. The thing she hadn't said outright, but that was there in every careful word she'd chosen. She wasn't just passing along information as an act of civic duty. There had been something warmer than that in her voice, something that made her uncomfortable enough to rehearse what she was going to say before she called. I noticed it. I filed it away, and I kept my full attention exactly where it needed to be, on Mason, on the case, and on the steps still ahead of me. Some things could wait. I filed on a Monday morning. Hale submitted the divorce petition and the simultaneous motion for temporary primary custody of Mason at 9:15. By noon, Amber had been served at her office. I know the exact time because Hale's process server sent a confirmation text, and I was sitting in my truck outside a resurfacing job on County Road 14 when it came through. I stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone in my pocket and went back to work. She called me 4 times between noon and 2. I let all 4 go to voicemail. That evening, I went to pick up Mason from daycare, as usual. When I pulled into my own driveway to get his things, Amber's car was already there. I'd expected that. I walked in through the front door, and she was standing in the living room, still in her work clothes, divorce papers in her hand, her face doing something complicated that moved between anger and something closer to genuine shock. Like part of her had genuinely not believed I would do it. "You filed for custody," she said. Not a question. Her voice was flat and stripped down. "I filed for divorce and for temporary primary custody," I answered, setting my keys on the table. "Yes." She stared at me. "You didn't even try to talk to me first. I found your messages 3 weeks ago, Amber." I kept my voice level and even. "I've been talking to you every single day since then, and none of it was real. You want to count that as a conversation? Go ahead." Her jaw tightened. "This is going to be ugly. It's going to be honest," I replied. "That's different." She set the papers down on the coffee table and crossed her arms. "I'm not just handing you Mason, Liam. He's my son, too. I know he is. And the court is going to decide what's best for him based on the full picture, including the account you opened in his name 14 months ago without telling me." Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the quick recalculation of someone who has just realized the other player has been holding more cards than she thought. She recovered fast, the way she always did. "That account was for his future," she said, lifting her chin. I almost smiled. "Open the same month your messages with Rick started. Carol Pitts at Hale's office has the full account history. You want to explain that timeline to a judge? Be my guest." Amber went very still. The room felt like it does on a job site when you've just identified the structural problem, and everyone around you understands at the same moment what it means. "You have been planning this for weeks," she said, and for the first time there was something raw in her voice. Not remorse, but genuine surprise at what I'd become in the space of 3 weeks. "I've been preparing," I said. "Same as you. The difference is I didn't use our son's name to do it." She picked up her phone and stepped toward the hallway. "I'm calling my attorney." "That's the right move," I told her. While she made her call, I went to Mason's room, packed a bag of his clothes, his stuffed dog, his 2 favorite trucks, and every document I could find with his name on it, his pediatric records, his immunization card, his daycare enrollment form. I moved efficiently and quietly, the way I move on a job site when the weather's turning and you need to secure everything that matters before it hits. When Amber came back into the hallway and saw the bag in my hand, her expression shifted again. "Where are you taking him?" she demanded. "To get him from daycare and bring him to Joel's," I said. "My attorney has already notified the court of his temporary residence. Everything is documented and above board." She stepped closer, lowering her voice in the way she always did when she wanted to sound reasonable and in control. "Liam, we don't have to do this way. We can work something out between us, without dragging this through a courtroom." I looked at her for a long moment. The woman I had married. The woman who had sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me honesty would be the foundation of everything, while she was already 3 months in a line to my face. "We tried your way," I said quietly. "Now we're trying mine." I picked up the bag, walked out the front door, and drove to daycare to get my son. 3 days after I filed, Rick Slade called me. I was on a job site when my phone buzzed. An unknown number, but the area code matched the part of town where Amber's office was located. I stepped away from my crew and answered. "Liam." His voice was even, almost friendly, like we were 2 guys who'd met at a barbecue once. "I think we should talk." I said nothing. I let the silence run. He filled it. "Look, I know this whole situation has gotten messy. That wasn't anyone's intention. I think if we could just sit down like adults, we could find a way to handle this that doesn't blow up any more lives than it already has." I watched one of my guys guiding a paving machine along the center line of the road and kept my voice completely flat. "Whose life are you worried about, Rick?" A short pause. "My wife doesn't know about any of this." There it was. That was the entire phone call, distilled to one sentence. Rick Slade wasn't calling to make peace. He was calling to negotiate his own damage control. "That's not my problem," I said. "Come on, man." His tone shifted, still controlled, but with something tighter underneath it. "You're going through a divorce. I get it. And you're angry. But dragging my family into this doesn't help you. It doesn't get you anything. It already happened," I told him. "My attorney contacted yours yesterday. and your wife's attorney was notified this morning as part of the discovery process. I paused. You should probably make a phone call, Rick. But it shouldn't be to me. He started to say something else. I ended the call. I stood there for a moment on the shoulder of County Road 14, with the hum of machinery behind me and the smell of fresh asphalt in the air, and I felt nothing about Rick Slade except a clean, final indifference. He had coached my wife on how to deceive me. He had received detailed information about my family's finances, and now that the walls were closing in, he wanted to talk like adults. Some things you just don't negotiate. That evening, Joel told me that Amber had called him twice, once at noon, once at 4. She hadn't left a message either time. Joel had blocked her number after the second call and texted me to let me know. She's looking for an angle, Joel said, handing me a plate across his kitchen counter. She won't find one here, I replied. 2 days later, I got a different kind of call, this one from a woman named Diane Kowalski, who was Rick Slade's wife. She was direct and composed in a way that told me she was holding herself together through sheer discipline. She said she'd received notification through her attorney that morning and had spent most of the day trying to verify what she'd been told before calling me. She had verified enough. I'm not calling to make this harder than it is, she said. I just want to understand the timeline. When did you find out? I told her. Not every detail, but the shape of it. When the messages started, when Amber proposed the open marriage, when I found the phone. Diane listened without interrupting. He told me he was working late on the nights I see in the emails, she said when I finished. Her voice didn't break, but it thinned slightly, the way a voice does when emotion is present but being held firmly in check. We have a 3-year-old daughter. I thought about Mason. I thought about a 3-year-old girl who didn't know yet what her father had done. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it completely. So am I, Diane replied. For what it's worth, and I know it might not be worth much right now, I want you to know that whatever comes out in these proceedings, I'm not going to protect him from it. He made his choices. He can answer for them. We talked for a few more minutes. Diane said her attorney and mine were already in contact. Before she hung up, she said one more thing. Your son is lucky to have a father who fought for him. I didn't have a good answer for that. I just thanked her and sat quietly for a long time after the call ended. The next morning, I drove to Mason's daycare early and signed a new emergency contact form. Joel is the primary backup. Diane's call still fresh in my mind. The daycare director, a woman named Pat, pulled me aside gently and asked if everything was okay at home. I told her Mason's parents were separating and that I wanted to make sure the communication protocols were clear about who could and couldn't pick him up. Pat nodded and updated the file on the spot. No drama. No questions beyond what was necessary. Just a woman doing her job carefully because a 4-year-old boy depended on the people around him to get the details right. That afternoon, I sat with Mason on Joel's back porch, and we ate sandwiches and watched a crow try to steal a piece of bread from the yard. Mason thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. He laughed until he had hiccups. I sat there beside him in the September light, watching my son laugh at a crow, and I thought, this is what I'm fighting for. Not the house, not the accounts, not the satisfaction of watching Amber and Rick face the consequences of what they'd done, though that was coming too. Just this, a 4-year-old boy with hiccups, completely safe, completely unaware of the machinery grinding away behind the scenes to keep it that way. Amber's attorney made the first aggressive move on a Monday, a motion arguing that my Facebook post about the divorce constituted harassment and demonstrated emotional instability that should be considered in the custody evaluation. I read the filing in Hale's office and felt something close to amusement. Hale was less amused but completely unrattled. This is a standard pressure tactic, he said, setting the papers down. They're hoping it rattles you into a settlement before the full financial picture comes out in discovery. It won't work, but I want you prepared for the hearing. The hearing was set for Thursday morning. I wore my work clothes, not a suit, not a costume, because I was a county road crew supervisor and that was the honest truth of who I was. Hale had advised me not to perform anything. Just answer the questions directly and let the record speak. Amber's attorney was a sharp woman named Karen Rhodes who moved through the courtroom with confident precision. She argued that I had made a unilateral decision to publicize private marital matters, that the Post had named Amber specifically, and that this kind of emotional reactivity indicated I was not in a stable enough state to serve as a primary custodial parent. When it was Hale's turn, he was quiet and methodical. He entered into the record the timeline of Rick's coaching message, the one instructing Amber to propose the open marriage as legal cover. He entered the financial data Amber had shared with Rick over multiple weeks. He entered Carol Pitts's findings about the custodial savings account opened in Mason's name. And then he turned to the judge and said, simply, "The post my client made was a true account of what happened to him. The opposing party is asking this court to penalize honesty while asking it to overlook 14 months of deliberate deception." The judge, a compact, unhurried man named Garrett who looked like he had seen every variety of domestic dispute the state of West Virginia had to offer, made a note on his pad and said nothing. Rhodes pushed back. She argued that the post had caused professional and personal damage to Amber, and that my framing of events was one-sided. Hale let her finish. Then, Your Honor, the opposing party's professional difficulties stem from a formal complaint filed with her employer regarding a workplace relationship that violated company policy. That complaint was filed by my client's attorney as part of the legal process, not as an act of retaliation. The post, meanwhile, contained no false statements. Truth is not harassment. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When he came back, he denied the motion. He noted for the record that the financial evidence before the court suggested a pattern of pre-divorce asset preparation that warranted further scrutiny, and that temporary primary custody with the petitioner, me, would remain in place pending the full custody evaluation. I walked out of that courtroom into the gray September morning and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. Hale came up beside me and shook my hand. "She's going to come back harder," he said. "But today was ours." I nodded. I wasn't celebrating. I was taking stock. Mason was safe. The record was clean. The truth was in writing in front of Judge. That evening I called Jill Wolfe to update her because she'd asked me to. She listened to the whole thing and was quiet for a moment when I finished. "I'm glad," she said. "I'm really glad, Liam." Her voice had that warmth in it again, the same warmth I'd filed away 2 weeks ago and told myself could wait. I thanked her for everything she'd done, said goodnight, and sat for a long moment after the call with my hand still on the phone. Some things could wait, but maybe not forever. The custody evaluation took 4 weeks. The evaluator was a family psychologist named Dr. Sandra Voss who worked out of practice on Market Street. She met with both Amber and me separately, observed each of us with Mason in a structured play session, interviewed Joel as a character witness, and reviewed the documentation Hale had submitted, the financial records, the timeline of the open marriage proposal, the messages. She was precise, unhurried, and gave nothing away during the process. I respected that. My session with Mason was on a Tuesday morning. I brought his favorite trucks and his stuffed dog, and we sat on the floor of a neutral playroom while Dr. Voss watched from across the room, making notes without interfering. Mason built a road out of foam blocks, assigned me the role of the construction crew, naturally, and narrated the entire operation with the authority of a 4-year-old who had grown up watching his father manage job sites. I followed his directions exactly. When he decided the road needed a bridge, we built a bridge. At one point, he looked up at me with complete seriousness and said, "Daddy, are you going to be at my birthday?" I kept my voice steady. I wouldn't miss it for anything, bud. He nodded like that settled it and went back to the road. That moment cost me more than anything else in the entire process. Not the legal filings, not the financial disclosures, not the courtroom hearing. A 4-year-old boy building a foam road and needing to know his father would be there for his birthday. I carried that question with me for days. The evaluator's report came back on a Friday. Hale called me before I'd even had coffee. The recommendation was primary physical custody to me, with generous scheduled parenting time for Amber, alternating weekends, 1 weeknight per week, and shared holidays. The report cited Mason's established routine in my care, the stability of my living situation, and, in careful clinical language, concerns about Amber's judgment and the degree to which her recent choices had disrupted the family structure. Amber's attorney filed a counter-objection within 48 hours. Karen Rhodes argued that the report failed to adequately weigh Amber's role as Mason's primary caregiver during the marriage. She was not wrong that Amber had been present and attentive. I never disputed that. What she couldn't argue away was the 14-month timeline, the hidden account, or the coaching messages. Those were in the record now, permanent and unambiguous. The week before the final hearing, Amber called me directly. I answered because Hale had told me to document all direct contact, and because part of me had been waiting for this call since the night I'd walked out of our house. I want to talk, she said. Not through attorneys. Just us. I'm listening, I replied. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, the sharpness was gone. What replaced it was something I hadn't heard from her in a long time, something that sounded almost genuine. I know I can't undo what I did. I know you're not going to forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. But Mason needs both of us, Liam. Whatever I did to you, he didn't do anything. He shouldn't lose his mother because I made bad choices. I sat with that. It was the truest thing she'd said to me in over a year. Nobody is taking you away from Mason, I told her. I never wanted that. What I wanted was for you to be honest with me, and you chose not to be. That has consequences. But the consequences are between you and me, not between Mason and his mother. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath. The settlement offer Hale sent, I continued. It's fair. It reflects the financial reality, including the account you opened in Mason's name, which the court already knows about. Sign it. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. For his sake. Another long silence. Then, okay. That was all. One word. But I knew from the way she said it that she meant it. The settlement was signed 8 days later. I kept the house, bought before the marriage and documented as such. The joint account was split, with Amber's share reduced proportionally to account for the redirected funds. The custodial savings account in Mason's name was transferred fully into a court-supervised education fund accessible only when he turned 18. Amber retained her car and her personal savings. Rick Slade was terminated from Amber's company 2 weeks after the formal complaint was filed. HR had reviewed the company communication records and found evidence of the relationship conducted on work devices during business hours. His own marriage didn't survive the disclosure either. Diane Kowalski filed within the month, citing the same pattern of deception she confirmed during our phone call. Amber eventually left the medical supply company. I heard through Jill that she'd taken a position at a smaller firm across town and was renting an apartment about 4 miles from the house. On her first scheduled weekend with Mason, she brought him back Sunday evening with a new stuffed bear and a look on her face that was somewhere between remorse and the particular exhaustion of someone who has finished paying a very large debt and isn't sure what comes next. Mason ran to me at the door. Daddy, Mommy got me a bear. His name is Truck. Perfect name, I said, and I meant it. I looked at Amber over his head. She looked back. There were no words for that moment that wouldn't have been too much or too little. I just nodded, and she nodded back, and she walked her car. 8 months after the settlement was signed, I was back on the same stretch of County Road 14 where I'd been standing when Amber was served. Different section of road. New crew assignment. But the same flat October light, the same smell of diesel and turned earth, the same rhythm of a job that has a clear beginning, a clear process, and a clear end result you can stand on when it's finished. I've always liked that about this work. You can see what you built. You could drive on it. Mason had started pre-K that fall. He informed me on the first day that his classroom had a building block corner that was, in his professional assessment, seriously lacking in dump trucks. I told him I'd look into it. His teacher, a patient woman named Ms. Beckett, sent me a photo 3 days later of a small yellow dump truck that had appeared in the block corner. No, just a photo. That about summed up Mason's effect on the world. On a Friday evening in October, Jill Wolfe and I had dinner at a small Italian place on Green Street. It was the 3rd time we'd had dinner. The 2nd time she'd driven. The first time either of us had acknowledged out loud that it was a date, though we'd both known it for a while. Jill was easy to be with in the way that real comfort is easy, not effortless, not without its own weight, but genuine. She had been in the middle of my worst year and had chosen the harder right thing over the easier wrong one. That meant something to me that I didn't have a clean way to articulate yet, but I didn't need to articulate it that night. We ate pasta and talked about Mason's dump truck diplomacy and her new job and a road trip she'd been thinking about taking, and it was good. Simple and good. Walking to the car, afterwards she reached over and took my hand. I let her, and we stood there for a moment in the parking lot in the cool October air, 2 people on the other side of hard things, holding on without making it complicated. I thought about what Joel had said on that first night at his kitchen table. She wasn't right for you. I'd known he was right, even before I admitted it. What I hadn't known yet was that the end of wrong things sometimes puts you in the same place as something worth building. I'm not a man who talks about feelings the way other men do. I'm a man who shows up, does the work, and builds things that last. What I know, at 42 years old, with a son who names his stuffed bears after construction vehicles, and a job that leaves honest dirt on my hands at the end of every day, is this: a foundation is everything. You can pour the most impressive structure in the world on top of shifting ground, and it will eventually fail. Every time, without exception. Get the foundation right. The rest follows. I squeezed Jill's hand, and she squeezed back, and we drove home in the October dark.